We've still got some people coming in, but I think let's kick off. So I'll just start with a brief introduction just to set the context, and then I'll hand over to you. So I think not everyone that's on the call now was in our session on Tuesday. So for those that weren't, I'll be sending out a note fairly soon with a link to download both the video as well as the slides that were shared. Not having been in the session on Tuesday is not the end of the world. You're still welcome to participate today. So the idea behind today's session is to have an interactive conversation around the topic of API management. And that was essentially the topic that we discussed on Tuesday. And it forms part of what we're calling this digital series, and covering API management, which touched a little bit on integration as well. And I think Christhonie is likely to touch a bit on integration as he goes through some stuff today. And then next week, Tuesday, we go into security with identity and access management. And then 2 weeks later, on the 4th of August, we move into cloud and focus specifically on the time case study, which happens to be AWS. So we'll do a case study on that. And then these Thursday sessions are designed to be interactive, where on the Tuesday was really about 2 hours of content and we push it at you. Now the opportunity is for interactive and Q&A, and Christhonie has not built any presentations or anything of that nature, but he'll use various sets of material to support and address the conversation. I think the one challenge that we're going to have today, so please bear with us as we do our best to manage the newness of running a session like this, is just the raise the hand and the enable the speak and that interaction. So obviously we can't have everyone's mics enabled at the same time. It would be a bit of chaos. So we're going to need to follow a protocol of you just using the raise the hand button. Christhonie will address a question and then we'll follow from there. Okay, so I do see, I'm going to hand over to Christhonie now. In fact, you can stop. You don't need anything from me. I'm just going to stop sharing. Well, I'll leave my screen like this for now, and we can just get the conversation tracking. I think there's already a hand raised. Can you access that, Christhonie?
Yes, I can. So, good morning, everybody. So we will go do this interactively. So if you've got your hand up in the attendee list, I will try to hand over an opportunity for you guys to talk. And during today's session, this session is meant to answer your questions. So as Steve said, I don't have a pre-prepared script to go through. I've got some content to show you, but I am mostly going to be driven by what you want to see about this product. And I've got some examples and APIs that we can publish today and play with. We will just see how that goes along. So I've got Jeremy. I'm going to allow you to talk. So let me see if my technology works right. Morning, Jeremy. If you unmute, you can talk.
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Oh, that's good. Are you well?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, did you ask me a question? I didn't get that last bit.
Yeah, I saw your hand was up in the panelist thing. I was just checking whether you've got a
sorry, that's an error on my side.
Not a problem. Okay, so right. Once you guys have, once I've unmuted you and you've asked your question, I will mute you again. So if at any point you want to have a follow-up question or I didn't explain it properly, if you can maybe just then indicate by putting your hand up again so that I can unmute you again. Okay, so today's discussion is going to be a follow-up from what we had on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, we spoke about the purpose of an API manager from the perspective of business and from the perspective of an API developer, so somebody developing stuff within your environment to expose on the API manager, and also thirdly from the party that wants to consume it. So today my focus is not going to be too much about the very first one. We're going to focus on the developers, and what I plan to show you today is I've got a little application running, and I'll interactively show you that now. And I'm going to show you how I'm going to make that application's APIs accessible through the API manager. I've already set up one just for in case the demo goes wrong. So I'll be doing a duplicate application. And then I'm going to show you how we are going to go about exposing this on our API store, and how the the public parties then can consume it. In this presentation, I'm going to use version 3.1.0 of the API manager. So it is the latest one that's available commercially as general availability on the WSO2 website. 3.2.0 I see is already in beta phase, so that one will typically follow very shortly. But there should not be too many changes. Some of our existing customers that might be on the call today might not be familiar with this version, because there was a huge facelift from version 3 onwards, which actually looks quite nice. So some of the slide decks you saw on Tuesday were still based on the actual version, I think 2.6.0 that we were running at that specific customer. So today we're going to see quite a few new screens in terms of that. Let me maybe get my screen shared again. If I can just find where the buttons are. There we go. Let's do that screen over there. Yes. So we talked about the API manager, and let me show you what it looks like. So we will start with the publisher. So keep in mind, if I flick back to my PowerPoint slides, we sort of, as I mentioned, we had these 3 parties involved, and we said, okay, right, so let's have a look at what the developer does. So this is our developer view. And we said our developer typically has a problem trying to get the API out there for people to see. We talked about the networking configurations that needs to get done in a traditional way of doing that, and how do we provide access control. So let's go and have a specific look about how we do that. So I've got a web application running. I just quickly wrote like an address book type of application. So in this application, you will see that we will have a functionality to show a list of countries. It's very easy for me to go and add another country. So let's just put our Zambia, India, oh, this is Zimbabwe, I think. Zimbabwe, right? So you'll see this appear in our API shortly. And we've got another set of entities, of people, for instance. Me and Steve is featuring prominently there at the bottom. So we're going to try and expose the APIs of this application through the API manager. So on this side, we've got the view of the API manager publisher. And this is the point where the developer will go to go and publish his APIs. So as you see, I've got 2 APIs running, but I think let's first try and publish a new API. Now, as I said, I'm going to do a duplicate of that address book you've got there. We will use the existing one that's on the screen for further demos, but let me show you how easy it is for us to get going and getting an API out on our system. So the moment I press the Create API button, I immediately get a choice of which type of technology my server is based on. So popular choices here are our REST APIs. So I've got an existing one. So I'm going to use the existing application to sort of seed my API publishing. But you can also go and say where you want to develop the API first, and maybe you want to mock it. So before you've even written a backend application, You might be under pressure from your customer or partner to make available some sort of API, which you obviously have already brainstormed and designed. And the application gives you a way to, from scratch, build this API, specify what its parts are going to be, which operations you want to expose, and then select those API endpoints to be mocked. So you can provide in API Manager some standard answers that you want to return in terms of those without even having a backend. And then you get to a point a bit later on where you wire up your backend server. So this is very good for quick prototyping. You can maybe use this as an interactive mechanism to quickly hash through some versions of an API and then use that design as the basis for your backend application. I just quickly want to see here. A lot of good comments I see coming in from our participants. Thank you, guys. It looks much better. I think some of the people are mentioning that it's a much cleaner design than the old one. So let's hop onto this option again. You can ask me any one of these things. I don't have backends for SOAP and GraphQL and WebSocket, but if you have questions around that, I can answer that. But let's maybe just step through the first iteration. So I'm going to click that I want a brand new API, and I'm going to select that I've got I'll try the URL. No, I'll rather do the file because I know I've tested this yesterday. So what the tool is trying to ask us is, can I give the tool an API definition? And a common definition file is a Swagger file for a RESTful API. And I saved the Swagger file from my application when I built it. So my application is built on Spring Boot. And when we build it in a certain way, we can ask the build process to spit out the Swagger file. If your technology stack doesn't have a tool like that, you can interactively through the menu system go and add operations. So I'll maybe show you how to do that on the next screen. But I'm in the lucky position to just have the Swagger file ready. So I will quickly go to my development drive. I've got it over there. And I put the Swagger there, right? So you can see it's 32 kilobytes. I definitely don't want to type that much during a presentation. So let's click the next button. So for now, let me leave it on that name. So I can give my API. Unfortunately, I can't use spaces over here. The words, the name that I pick here must be proper. I can use capitalization, for instance. So I'll maybe go and do that. WSO2 AM demo. And then I need to give it an endpoint. Now, when I talked about making your application accessible outside your organization on Tuesday, this is going to sort of add a path to the standard entry point that you've got for your organization. So for big organizations, I recommend that there's maybe a bit of a red tape process over here where there's a central team assigning these names. So let's say my company is called acme.com. And I had the idea to expose my API manager as api.acme.com. What I'm typing here is going to be what any external developer will have to type in as a URL after that. So let's say I'm going to call this demo. Then my URL for the outside world to access this application is going to be api.acme.com/demo. So you can see selecting a good name here, if you know you're going to have a lot of APIs coming along, is quite important to get that right. For a small little test application like we're doing now, this is very trivial. And I'll leave it on this version. So you'll see in the URL, the application, the API manager immediately puts the current version in there because the product supports multiple versions of your API. Now, it's a bit of a complicated topic to discuss in a short demo like this. If there's questions around that, I will answer it later on. But I'm going to brush over that for now. But typically, let's say you've got two versions of an API, it will typically mean that you've got two versions of your application running in the background, maybe on two different servers or two different ports. Or if you've quite creative in your development processes, you can actually make multiple versions of an API accessible through your application. But you need, if you, for instance, in Java, you need to think carefully about the namespaces and the things you use. but I think I'm getting into too much detail now. So let's type in the port. Okay, now this is a good question. Where did I expose it? It is on that port over there. Sorry guys, I was just copy and paste that. I should have made a note of this one. So what I'm telling my API manager over here is, for this API that I'm trying to expose, I want you to use that server IP address, which should be accessible behind the scenes in my organization. So let's say, for instance, I've installed my API manager inside my Johannesburg data center. It would assume that that server is accessible from that data center. So you'll typically want to expose a server that's close to the gateway. If you've got multiple data centers, you might want multiple gateways. So we might go and touch on that a little bit later on. So that's just the URL, and I'm going to press this little button just to see whether the API manager can get a hold of it. So I've got a 200 there, so I know I am good to go. Business plans, won't talk too much about this, but you can specify in your API manager what sort of level of service are you willing to give to this API. Now, most of us say, oh, I want people to have full access as much as you can, but keep in mind your infrastructure might be limited in performance, whether it's memory or network bandwidth or CPU power for your servers. You might want to go and say that some APIs I want to throttle and say people can only call this, let's say if I use the bronze option, they can only call this API 1,000 times a minute, and that would prevent you from overloading either your server or your API manager. Now, there's many throttling policies, and I don't want to go into all of that for this demo. You guys can reach out to me after this presentation for more information about that. So for now, I'm just going to select bronze, for instance, just to limit it a little bit. And I'm going to press the create button. So when I did the presentation on Tuesday, I said you need to fill in 3 screens with API version 3.1.0, 1 screen. So it takes some default settings. So by pressing this button, my API is accessible now. So if I've got a fixed installation in my company of API manager, this is all I need to do to get going and allow people to connect to it. So we'll just go over some of the configuration values that's on the screen here now, the summary information, and then I'm going to go through the menu options on the left-hand side, so that I can show you how you can now tweak this configuration. But basically, we've got a rudimentary setup going, and I'm going to show that with a command line that I will go and run as well. Keep in mind, at any time you can ask me questions. So if I'm going over these things too fast, I am keeping an eye out on the attendee list. So if you want to talk, please just raise your hand and I can answer your question. So on this page, I get a summary of what I've done. So I can see the name of my, my context that I'm exposing this API as. I can sort of see the resources over there that I pulled in. So this is an application that's got quite a few API endpoints to manage the users that's on there, and not just those 2 entities that I showed you. I can see that I'm exposing my application as both HTTP and HTTPS, and I can go and change that. If this is, for instance, a financial application or an application that's got sensitive information, let's say POPI Act applies here, we might not want to go and select HTTP, and we might want to limit people to only use HTTPS. Now you'll notice I have only specified the HTTP endpoints for my application because I have not implemented SSL security on my Java application because it's quite difficult to do. Let me maybe also explain some of the problems there. So let's say I would have developed my Java application and I would have selected HTTPS. I had to select a certificate to use. And there might now be extra work I need to do to maintain that certificate because they typically only last about 12 months. And because I know that there's not sensitive information going from the API manager to my Java application, I can just as well pick a shortcut to say, although the internet, people from the internet must connect to HTTPS, I let the API manager connect to the backend, for instance, with HTTP in this specific scenario. So it makes my life easier. It reduces CPU consumption of my application because it doesn't need to decrypt messages and maintain the management of the certificates. I also save memory from my application's perspective. Again, if you've got a financial application or an HR application, you will typically don't want to do that. There you would want to go and even do end-to-end encryption, even between two servers inside your data center, because you might find that there's a risk of your own staff or maybe contractors in your data center trying to intercept that traffic and learn something from that. API security is at the moment set up. So there's a default configuration and that is going at the moment. Okay, so I think that's all that I'm going to say at this point in time. So let's try and use this API for now. So I'm going to first jump somewhere else to just show you that it's working. And then we'll come back to the screen over here. So I can go and press this button. We go to, I'm missing one more button. Quickly go and see. Okay, so I can see it's available, right? I've put it there. I'm supposed to see another button over here to take me straight to the API store, but let me go and do it over here. I'll just refresh the screen. So we will describe the screen in a bit more detail later on. Okay, I know. See, this is now typically how demos work. Oh, there was a publish button. Sorry, guys. So at this moment, the API is only in the created state. That means I've staged it on my environment, but I've not made it available to the public. So I was lying a bit earlier on. I'll show you the life cycle. So there's a little picture over here that shows us that my API is now in the created state, and I can either go to the published state over here, or retrospectively, I can put it in the prototype stage. So the prototype stage is where I can go and mock the APIs where there's no backend server at the back. So I'm going to select this option where I'm going to go from created state to published, just so that we can see it on the outside of our environment. So you see the latest version of WSO2 gives this nice checklist to sort of show me what am I still missing at the moment. So I can clearly see that I've not fulfilled the prototyping or the publishing step. I'm going to press this button now. And what the publisher now does is it goes to the gateway nodes in my API manager installation. And keep in mind, if I've got multiple data centers, I will have many gateway nodes spread throughout the country or throughout the world. By pressing that button, it publishes it to each of the elected gateways where I wanted to expose that. So now there's my button that I was missing a bit earlier on, where I can just quickly click that, and it takes me to the specific definition of this API inside the API store, which is what the external parties will now see. So from here, I've got the information on how to interact with this API. Again, I'm just jumping a bit forward. I'm going to just press this try out button. I just want to make sure that it's working before we go back. Okay, now the try out button is all about, it gives me the opportunity to interactively work with my API. Because it's the first time that I've clicked on this button, the API manager is gathering the various data elements so that it can visualize the screen, which is taking a bit longer than I expected. I'll give it another 10 seconds. Gives me an opportunity to drink some coffee. Okay, I think I'm going to give up on this guy. I don't know why I'm having difficulty here, but I will demonstrate that a bit later on. Obviously, I'm going to demonstrate it on the API that I've prepared yesterday already. So let's have a look at the various options in the publisher. So sorry for jumping around, but I need to improvise as we go along. So here I can specify more information that is going to be accessible on this store interface. So for instance, I can go and select an icon that I want to use. So let's say we will just use a little tick mark, and I want to use a background with a bit of a red color. There we go. So that's just how I want to visualize it. And I can even upload my own photos. And I can go and type in here, this is a demo API for our digital series. The digital series, if we can just type right. I can make I can make sure that this API is either accessible to everybody on the store, or I can require that people log in to gain access to this. So this is quite handy when you've got trusted partners that you want to use your APIs with. You don't want to expose the APIs to the world. And for them, you will give them a login onto your store, or you'll ask them to register on your store. There's a self-registration option. And you will then go and put that customer or that person into a specific group or role that you can set up over here. So let's say I've set up a role called partners. I can go and select here that I want to restrict it by roles, and I can then type in the role name. I know for a fact there's an admin role, if I'm not mistaken. No, there's not one. Can I see the roles now? So I've not set up any roles, so I think that's why it's only the user definable roles that's selected here. So let me just stick to what I had. So it just means anybody can see this API, publish access control, developer portal visibility. Okay, I had it the wrong way around. That is who in my organization can control this and manage this API. So it might be my development team. So I just read wrong. And over here is where I set the public visibility roles. And let's give this thing some tags. So I'll call it demo. I'll use demo one, and I'll call it also address. And we use those two tags. And if I've configured any categories up front, which I haven't done, I can select the category over here, and then I can group my APIs based on maybe business function or things like that. So when I've got a vast asset base of APIs, I might want to go and think of how to structure that. So I might say I've got applications in the HR category, and in my retail category, and in my vending category, and it makes it easier for the public to find the APIs under given headings in the store. Let's press the save button over here. Runtime configurations. So here we will set up things like, how would I like to secure my API? So I mentioned a bit earlier on, I can select on which transports I want to expose this. So at the moment, the API manager will give the developer two URLs that he can use, the HTTP one and the HTTPS one. So let's maybe just for now switch off HTTP, because we can now assume, let's assume there's some sensitive information. We don't want the customer to speak to the API manager, which is on the edge of our network, to use HTTP. And if we really fancy, we can switch on mutual SSL. One of our customers had this need quite recently, where over here, when you click this button, you can set up a certificate which builds this trust relationship between the calling parties and the API manager, and it gives you a much better security layer. But it's a bit too complicated for our demo today, so I'm going to avoid this. Application level security. So I can also say that I might want to also give basic authentication and maybe a static API key for my users to use. Now, OAuth is by far the best one in terms of security, which means any developer connecting to your API must first go and request the key or token, and that token is usually valid for 60 minutes, and he needs to keep refreshing that token. If I select basic, I can give my user on the outside a username and a password, and they can connect that way. But now if a hacker figures out your username and password, that session and any further sessions can be compromised. So that is why this option and the API key is not that good of an option. And the API key itself option is just a static token that you can give somebody, and they can then gain access to your API that way. So just for now, I'm going to select all of them. And it's just saying that we expect the token to arrive in the authorization header on my HTTP layer. Course configuration becomes a bit difficult to explain to people for those that build a lot of single page web applications that live where the code for the web page lives on a different server than the server where the APIs are hosted, which is the case here. You might want to go and set up course rules so that browsers and so on will prevent cross-site scripting vulnerabilities of your application. So this basically just means that when your app operates, it will only allow requests coming from certain URLs, and any people trying to access your API outside those rules will be denied. So let's say, for instance, you had a Postman application and you would have set up the CORS rules for your backend server. You will not be able to Postman or SOAP UI into it. Schema validations is when you want to, before message gets sent in, the API manager must first scrutinize the JSON or the XML message to make sure it's valid before it will allow it to go into the API manager. Very handy if your backend service doesn't have this functionality and they easily crash or throw exceptions when things go wrong. You can use the API manager, sort of yet another extra layer to make sure that malformed messages do not arrive at your backend services. And then these message mediations, you will see over here, over there, and over there. You can go and write code to transform messages on the fly before it gets to the backend server. So let's say, for instance, you've published your API and now you've realized you made a big mistake, but a lot of people have already signed up to the address book / users endpoint, and you realized you've got a bug in the backend code and you might want to go and transform that message before it gets to the backend. There's an opportunity to do this here. I would not suggest you do this on a regular basis because it takes a lot of CPU processing on your gateway nodes to perform mediation. If mediation is a common pattern in your organization between the API manager and the backend, rather install something like WSO2 ESB, which is the enterprise integrator product, and do the mediation on dedicated nodes for performance reasons. So I'm not going to do anything over there. So this was the backend stuff. So let's press save. And I'm going to go a little bit faster on the rest of the stuff because now we're sort of getting a bit to some of the boring stuff. Resources over here. I guess this is not boring. It's just maybe complex. Here is where I control which endpoints is being exposed to my users at the end of the day. So remember, I pulled in a Swagger file a bit earlier on. That Swagger file did all of the work for me. So it created all of my operations. You'll see there's an account one, and there's an activate one for the users clicking the link inside the activation email. There's my country APIs, and there's my people APIs, and some other things. And the proper verbs has been set here. Now, let's say I want to go and add another one. I know there's a management info, which is not exposed over here. So let me try and add one over here. So I can go and say slash, it's not API, or is it management? I think it's just management /info. These are called the health endpoints that most Spring Boot applications have. And they are usually not defined in the Swagger file. It's an operation. So I'm going to say this is typically a get operation. And I'm going to say it's accessible over there. And I'm going to press the button here. And it would have added it, I guess, at the bottom. There we go. There's a little note over there. So let's quickly see what's going on here. And so now you can also see, so remember, I've now added this manually, but you can go and edit any one of the ones that is imported already, where you can go and put in a description. So I can, for instance, now go and say, this is the health check endpoint, right, which my load balancer or something can use. Make sure my app is up. I'm not going to give anything there. Let's switch off security. So we will allow people to access this specific API without having any tokens in place. Now, it's different from the other ones. All of the imported API endpoints is already protected because right from the beginning, we selected OAuth, or I think that's the default setting. I don't think we had an option this time. But I'm adding this one, and I'm specifically adding that this one doesn't require security. I will also say that because this is a health endpoint, I don't expect people to access it a lot. So let's limit the use of this endpoint. And there's absolutely no parameters that I want to put in. So I'm going to leave this one as is. And I'm not going to do anything over there. So let's just quick save so that we got this one saved. And let me just show you a more complicated one. So I know, for instance, if I want to get a list of countries, I know that my API has got quite a few query parameters. So this is a nice complicated API call. So it's an API countries get operation, and you can select, you can search by where the country code contains a certain value, equals a certain value, is some other value, is, or the ID is greater or equal to, I don't know, that's not very practical to have, or the country name has got a certain pattern. So you can see that all of the possible parameter variations on this API call can also be specified here, so that when our developer interacts with our store, we can expose this information. And you will see a bit later on when we get to code generation, the code generation tool will then also include this type of information. So the more information you can give here, the better. We have sometimes a trick where we just put a wildcard endpoint in there, which means I can quickly expose an endpoint for which I don't have any definitions. But just like you might not know what the definitions are, the developer that's going to subscribe to that API will definitely not be able to figure it out. So it's better to do the upfront work so that all of this information, all of the structural information of your API is available to the outside world. Just see the time. Steve, by the way, should I maybe try to wrap this up so that we can get to the questions, and then maybe come back here if there's more questions? I'm just worried we're going to run out of time. So maybe let's see if there's anybody wanting to ask a specific question or a specific question on any one of the menu items here. I would like to get to the store, and I can rather use the time at the end to come back and delve into a bit more information. I'm just worried I talk too much and I don't give you guys the opportunity to talk. So let's maybe see if there's any questions at this point in time. Steve, how are we on time?
No, like, we're good. Time's not our issue. I think it's the same as being in a physical room. You know, you got to get the first people to start chatting. So we need to incentivize who to speak first. So, you know, I know a few of the attendees here, and I think we know the type of things we could incentivize them with Christhonie to get them to speak up. So
I'm going to challenge one of my team members that's on the call at the moment, Heinrich. You work with, is Heinrich still on the call? I don't see him now. I think he might have another call, and I think Leon is also not available. I wanted to actually challenge them on something. Okay.
I was surprised that some of them didn't jump in and start correcting some of the stuff you were doing, by the way, especially when you got stuck.
Yeah, I see some of my clever colleagues is on the line as well, so I hope they're not going to give me a gas a bit later on about something that I got wrong. But I think my API is deployed well. I still don't understand why it's not showing on this one screen. We'll get to that, I hope.
I'm looking for the person that's going to solve the problem for you. I'm looking for the person that's going to raise their hand and solve the problem for you.
Yeah, I think this must be a test for our own people so that they can explain to me what they think is wrong over here. It's a nice fault-finding exercise. Okay, let me not waste any more time. So let me jump to the portal side now, guys. Obviously, I'm showing you this API that I just created now. I'm going to go back to this portal, and I'm going to show you that our API is visible. But I'm going to use the one that I prepped yesterday because, as you saw, I got a bit of problems trying to access that one just now. So let's try my address book one. So keep in mind, the address book and this demo one is the same backend application. It's a Java application running in the background. It's related to this application that I showed you over here. So I'm expecting some of the data I'm seeing here to reflect on our API. So let's go and close this one. We focus on that one. So now let's put ourselves in the shoes of our partner or our internal and another development team within our organization, or a customer that wants to make use of our address book functionality. Now, they get more limited type of information because they're not the ones going to obviously configure it. So this is a much simpler interface. So at a high level, this one I gave a fancy version number. I called it the address book application. Our main Christhonie over here is Steve. He wrote this application for us. And we've deployed this on our Google GCP environment, which is where this application is running at the moment. And maybe I'll just quickly touch on this. When you're in the publisher and you are setting up your API, based on how your API manager was installed, you get options of in which environments you want to deploy this. And now I can also see what my problem was, Steve. So when I created this brand new API, I'm supposed to come and select in which one of my data centers do I want this API to appear. Now, because I only have one data center for this demo today, I have to select my Google GCP environment and I have to save it, which will now cause the API manager to go and publish it inside Google GCP. And if I come back to my portal over here, now I'm convinced it's going to work. I just want to test this now because I think this was the blonde moment. There we go. So I did not deploy my API. That is why I couldn't show you guys this. But okay. So my point here was if you've got 5 data centers across the world, you will go and pick here where you have deployed or where you want to expose that API. And when you press the save button, the API manager will go and deploy this. Now, keep in mind, some organizations might have on-premise data centers where you want to serve your internal customers. So it might be a retailer where you want to serve your in-store applications, but you might also have another data center that you host in the cloud for your customer-facing applications. And you pick the cloud because you want elasticity. Or you want the API to be closer to your users where your on-prem data center might not have a good internet connection. You can then select multiple environments over here to deploy that. And when you get to the API over here, and I'm going back to the one I'm using, we will then see each of those environments that I can use. Now, keep in mind, you can use clever techniques like global load balancers through companies like Cloudflare, where you can have a single API and you make Cloudflare redirect your customer to the closest data center you have, but that's an advanced topic. But for now, this example is all about each data center could get a different set of URLs to access them directly. And just quickly over here, the user can see all of the endpoints that is available, but we will go into a bit more detail about that just now.
Christhonie, I just want to raise a question that was asked, and it relates to, in this case, specifically GCP, but I'm sure that you'll address it more broadly than just GCP, but about hybrid deployments. Oh, sorry, I also see there's chats happening here as well. Hey guys, there's so many things I need to keep my eye on. So the question was around hybrids. Yeah, so can you run this as
Yes.
a hybrid with GCP and on-prem as well?
Okay, so sorry guys, I missed this chat window that also has stuff. I was looking at people raising hands on the attendee list. Okay, good question. So yes, you will typically select one of your data centers where you want this UI to run. So you will go and think about what is the most accessible data center that you have to serve HTTP content, and you'll put the publisher and the store application inside that data center. So let's say in a South African scenario, you might go and want to host this application you see on the screen in an IS, Azure, West or North data center, or maybe an AWS, sorry, I don't know the region names here, for that, so that the public can easily access this application. You can also argue that it's only really the store you want there. You can maybe say, but my publisher is only going to be ever used by internal staff. So it might be that you want to only run this application inside your on-prem data centers where it's close to your developers, for instance. And then you can put the gateway nodes wherever you need them. So I have a slide on that. I'll quickly take you to that specific slide. So let's say this. So let's take, for instance, this slide over here. You might want to go and select that this publisher runs on your on-prem data center, your web portal you want to run somewhere in the cloud where it's accessible, and you will deploy multiples of this sort of gateway nodes. Okay, this one has got too many little things in there. Let's make it simple. It's this one over here. So all you need to do is you need to deploy, and I would always suggest deploy 2 of these small servers. It's minimum 2 CPUs. I would really suggest 4 CPUs per node, so 2 of them in each of your data centers. So this can be, let's say, a cloud instance, and for each of your data centers, you need to deploy this. And yes, that could be completely hybrid, whether the gateway lives in a cloud instance or whether it lives on an on-prem instance is neither here or there. So the short answer was yes, right. Depends if you have gateway nodes there or if you're talking about load balancing failover. Okay, so there's a question to that question. Sorry, I'm just following up whether I'm answering everything. Also a question related to auth. This could be a question for another session maybe, but the auth of the API store, would that be able to work with traditional LDAP and GCP auth? Yes. So let's give you, so I would imagine this question revolves around, do I need to use the users I store inside WSO2 API Manager to give people access to my APIs? And the answer there is, it depends, it can be, but there are 2 options. The first option is, obviously we'll do a sales pitch first. You install WSO2 Identity Server, which is a federated identity manager. Then you can wire up your API manager to the identity server, and you set up the identity server to the various identity server providers that you want to supply. So let's say, for instance, you would want to allow a Facebook login and GitHub login, as well as your Azure login, as well as Active Directory login. You will need a tool like that called the Federated Identity Management tool to provide that function. But many of the cloud solutions also have similar functionality. So I know for a fact that Azure has something similar. Then we can also wire up the API manager to make use of an external identity provider where these users can be stored on. So the product is quite configurable in how you want to do that. It fits in with your existing identity management system. And if your existing one is not maybe federated and you want that, or you want single sign-on, we can put WSO2 Identity Server in there to sort of supplement the missing functionality as well.
I think go back to the one about load balancing and failovers. Can you see that there? I think it was a point, must have been about what you were talking about at the time. So it depends if you have gateway nodes there. Yep. Are you talking about load balancing or slash failovers?
I'm just going to open another slide deck that I have where I've actually got a very nice picture for that. I always have lots of slide decks available, so I just want to make sure there's no customer name in here. Okay, yes, it looks fine. See, my animations is not lacquer here. Okay, so this is, for instance, a slide that I prepped to show how you would go about if you've got 2 data centers. So you'll see that in this case, I just made that the publisher and the dev portal, they live with a gateway and WSO2 enterprise integrator in one data center. But then you create sort of a link to your different data center. By the way, API nodes are optional. So I didn't have it on the previous slide, so you could ignore that for now. But this would be the type of configuration. And the communication between this data center and that one, there's 2 things that need to happen. First, there's an API call from the publisher to the gateway to inform that gateway of updates of new APIs that is deployed. And that connection is only needed at design time when you make a change. If that connection between your two data centers sever at any point in time, it does not affect the operation of that isolated data center. Once it's got its configuration, it runs off that configuration. It's like updating its config files, and then it can run on its own. The other thing that then gets synchronized, and this might be another consideration, is you want to synchronize maybe tokens. So if you've got a user that sometimes log into your Cape Town data center and then sometimes log into your Johannesburg center, and you want them to use the same access token or JWT, okay, no, JWT is not coming into this equation, sorry, access tokens, you need a way to sync these two data centers, databases, in terms of the active tokens that is available. And in that specific case, you just need database replication. Now there, when the link goes down, the tokens will not get synchronized, but you can then solve that through other mechanisms. But in essence, this is how you would set up a multi-data center and or hybrid data center. So DC2 can be your GCP instance, and DC1 can be your Cape Town data center. Okay, I don't see more questions, but please feel free to keep typing. I'm going to go back to my publisher screen. No, we are going to go back to this one over here. We are back at the screen that the public will see, the developer wanting to use your API. So let's see what he can do. So the first thing he must do is he must do a subscription. So why is this important? You as the owner of your backend applications would like to know who's connecting to my APIs. You might want an approval process so that you only approve your partners to subscribe to an API. So you can put a whole workflow mechanism there so that when I click the subscribe button, Steve gets an automated email to say, "Hi Steve, Christhonie is trying to access the address book application. Would you like to grant him access, yes or no?" And he can then click a link in his email, and that can give me access. At the moment, I've just set this thing up that anybody can press the subscribe button, whether it's for production or for the sandbox environment, and they'll get access. So let's go and do this. I'm going to press this because this is the minimum requirement I've got. And let's say I want to do this I want to connect my Postman instance to this. So I'm going to ask the application to generate me a new application. So I'm calling this Postman so that I get a dedicated set of keys for my Postman instance. I don't want to play with production keys in this case. And that gives us, the backend people, also insight about who's accessing my API and from which of their applications are they accessing us. So it will become clear now from an auditing perspective that somebody's Postman application is trying to access our app. And I'm going to select an opaque token. So this is the normal access tokens as my token type, but I can select JWT as well. It's just a bigger payload. I just don't want to get that. And I'm just going to mention this. This is for my testing. Then I'm going to select that I want unlimited access. This API is only set up this way, but let's say if there's throttling, I could have selected something different. And I'm going to say that this application is only going to use client credentials and password credentials and maybe a refresh token. And I'm not going to fill in the callback stuff that comes in when you do sort of Angular applications and you want sign in. So I'm going to say I can maybe use username and password authentication or client credentials for this one. And let's go to the next one. And I'm going to say I usually want my token to be valid for an hour. I'm not going to fill in scopes, advanced topic today. And I'm going to press next. And there I get a token that was generated. Now keep in mind, this token is only valid for 60 minutes, and I'll put it inside the clipboard now, just so that I can play with it a bit later on. Okay, so you can see that yesterday I played with, I had a little Android app over there, and now I've got my Postman application. So let's go and try and connect to this API, because now I've got all of the things. I have a subscription to be able to speak to this API, and I've requested on-the-fly token. Now keep in mind, when you're writing an app, you will need to do those steps programmatically. You can't go and generate the token once and put it in your source code. First and foremost, it's a security problem. And secondly, that token will expire. So by the time you've published your application, it's all gone. So let's say we're going to make an HTTP call, and let's go maybe to the list of countries. So I know for a fact if I'm going to call this, I should get a list of countries, and I can maybe say, I'm not going to fill in any of the parameters, but now you can see, because I invested time a bit earlier on in the publisher to specify all the possible parameters for this API, I get all of these settings interactively over here. I'm going to press the try out button, and I am going to press the execute button over here. Now this tool remembered my token, so I don't need to type it in anywhere. So what it does, oh, wonderful, access failure, API, address book, invalid credentials. Oh, okay, right. Maybe my token was not valid. Yes, indeed. Sorry, I thought it updated it automatically. So the token that I just generated, I see was not specified there. So let me just try this again. Okay, there we go. So first and foremost, the tool will give you the curl command that you can run from the command line to go and test it on, let's say, a Linux, or if you've installed the tool on a Windows box, you can run this from the command line. It gives you an indication of what the call is going to be about. It's going to be, I know it's a get to that specific URL. And here you can see inside the tool, I've returned all of the countries that's inside my database. Now remember, we added Zimbabwe a bit earlier on. Zimbabwe is now featured on our list, which should be exactly the same data than what we've seen over here. By the way, this app uses the same API. So Zimbabwe there at the bottom, and it shows as over there as well. So let's use that curl command. You see it has already copied my token in there. So we'll quickly use that. I'll find a Linux window somewhere. Let me just type in clear over here before I confuse you guys about what we see here. So now I'm here on a Linux box. Let me make it big screen for us. And I can paste that curl command over there. And it's just complaining about it's not trusting that certificates. So let me just tell it to please ignore the trust relationship. And there I get the same code, same data that I just saw on the UI. So now I'm proving that if I use api.arcs.co.za, which is the external endpoint for my API, if I use that, and remember there is the context that we've typed in for the demo application, that was demo, but this one I made address book, there was the version, and there's the API countries part. So by accessing that, I get access to this information immediately. One of my team members have informed me that if I would have refreshed the UI at that point in time, I wouldn't have to copy and paste that token over there. So this API, guys, is accessible from the internet. If you guys type in, and by the way, I will quickly paste it in the chat window for everybody to use. Some of the techie guys on the call might find it interesting to go and play with this specific command. So I've given it to you. You should be able to access it from your computers wherever you are in the world through that URL that I've posted there. Okay. I'm going back to this screen. So I showed you that I can interact with it. I want to maybe add one more thing. I know that in my countries, there was a country code that was ZM. So I can also specify ZM where I say, this is just how I wrote my Java application. Your app must support this. I just want to show you that if I would only put in ZM, because I know the code for that country is that, and I press the button over here, it will give me the code that I must run. So you can see over there, code.equals ZM over there, and the API returns 1. Now you can now imagine how nice this is for developers trying to work with your API. They don't actually need to start up their Postman application to figure out how your API works. They can interactively play with the screen and learn how the data comes out of the system and try various parameters and figure out how to develop their application. Because for me, I find the biggest problem we get with integrations is the party that wrote the application doesn't fully communicate with the party that is trying to consume the application. There's always something wrong in terms of maybe how they've explained it, or maybe the documentation around this API was not very clear. Having the ability to actually touch the API and play with it and see what's coming out and have lots of sample messages is absolutely ideal. Just here, it also shows you which error messages you can expect. So the API manager will immediately implement the 401 if your token was invalid, for instance. And we actually had that just a few minutes ago. And if you use a parameter or an API call that's not valid, you will get a 404. So there's some standard error handling, but also your application could have application-specific error codes, which you must code in your backend. And you will have to put that in your Swagger file or go and edit here by hand so that the user can see what are the various errors that can be returned. Now, all of the tests I've been running now is actually done on my production system. So if you run an organization where you want to do this in a mature way, you would typically go and have a server that's called your sandbox or your staging environment, where you will allow people to interact with it like this, so that when they're busy testing APIs over here, they don't inevitably alter data on your production system. And you'll typically allow this tool to only use your sandbox endpoint to perform these functions. And usually we lock down the production endpoint so that you must subscribe to it, and there must be approval behind it so that you can gain access. And the tool will give you 2 sets of keys. And I think I might have brushed over that a little bit too quickly a bit earlier on. But when we were over here, you will see I have an option to either get production keys or sandbox keys. So for every application I generate on the, that I consume on the API manager, for each subscription, I can have a separate set of sandbox keys and production keys. So because I've already generated my production keys, there's my consumer key, there's my consumer secret, and there is my access token. When this access token gets submitted to the server, it knows this is a production call. Where if I would have generated the keys over here, and it could be different, but let me just make them the same. And I generate a set of keys over here. These ones will now be completely different from my production keys that I will give to my developer to go and use in his dev and QA environments. And that way, the API manager will simultaneously serve your staging and or your QA environments, depending on how you want to do your environments, and your production instances. And as I mentioned, you can then have an approval process around when people can get their production keys. Okay. Then just lastly, you might want to do like a bit of a Facebook type of comment things here where people can ask questions about your API. When you do this over here, the system fires off an email to the developer that's listed as the technical contact for this API. So as people have got questions, they can ask it here, or you can simply ask them to make use of the link over here. Let me quickly see what have we done with. I might not have specified a business user and a technical user. Guys, if anyone on the team knows where to find this now, because I don't see it on the screen, but there was an email link here in the past. I'll see if I can run into it a bit later on. And also you can put any documentation that you've linked to this API inside the API manager. So it could be a PDF document. I just took a random URL that I found on the internet for an address book thing, and you can have these links straight inside your API manager, which takes them to the documentation for your API. So that's handy to have there. Then the public does not need to make contact with the developer to figure out what to do. And as I mentioned in my presentation the other day, you need to still do documentation. Just having the swagger there is not enough to define APIs, because that only gives you the structural nature of your API. You still need to describe to a user the what-if scenarios. Why do you have this API? What's the purpose of it? When do you fill in all of these forms? When do you fill in some of the fields in the message? If you get an error, how much you deal with it? Those things can't be described in a Swagger document or in API Manager. So you need to have supporting documentation if you want professional APIs out there in the world. So you need to put yourself in the shoes of the developer trying to use this. Last thing over here, Q&A.
So you got that point across well on Tuesday. I already had the CIOs of one of our other customers go, I want what Christhonie showed me on Tuesday. No more swagger.
So I've got a edge case scenario, but could we configure the workflow to update and notify subscribers when a new version of an API gets published, taking into account that we have an SMTP server configured? So that forms part of the BPMN functionality that you can customize for your application. So you will typically connect, so I'll just press here that I'm answering it live, sorry. That keeps my thing clean. So the product has got many hooks where you can hook onto events that happen within the system. So you can connect a workflow hook onto a new version being published, and then you can write code inside that workflow to notify all of the subscribed parties in previous versions of the API. So it's indeed possible, but keep in mind, it's not a click, click, click UI type of thing. You need to understand how to use the business process engine, and you will need to get a developer to go and build that workflow and build that query and do the necessary API calls to achieve that goal. But this product is extremely extendable. So on the process engine side, as well as if you want to go and write custom Java code that you can deploy into the application as an OSGI container. And now I can already see Jason going, okay, that is quite difficult to do. But there is options, and the ARCs can explain to you how to get those things right. And then you can even do like Java code where your code gets called whenever an event happens, and you can go and do the queries in Java if you're not familiar with the business process engine. Okay, so two options, Jason. Lastly, one of the biggest problems we find is the developers trying to use our applications are completely baffled by this technology and APIs. And we often get developers asking us, but what is this OAuth thing? So for us integration engineers, this is quite common stuff. But we realize that not everybody knows how these things work. And having to write code to go and request a new token every 60 minutes and know when to do it, and the ifs and the buts and the whens about it, and writing the code to connect to a server to get a JSON or an XML message is for some people foreign, or the combination of all of these things are simply too complicated. The product then has these standard languages where you can simply click a button and the product generates you source code for your specific API. So because I am more familiar with the Java code that's going to be generated now, maybe I'm going to press this button and just quickly show you what I have in mind. So I'm going to press download over here. The server is now busy building a custom copy of the Java code for me, which is taking a little bit longer than I planned. Let me quickly open my Explorer. So I need to be on downloads. Okay, pizza show. Okay, right. It hasn't generated it yet. Okay, right. Let's quickly see why it hasn't. That's the other API. This is interesting. I'm not going to try and debug it now. Let me just quickly first press another button, and I still don't see it. I'm going to show you obviously I have a bug in how I deployed this Pizza Shack application that comes as your sample application in API Manager when you deploy it. It's got similar functions. I pressed this button yesterday, and that gave me the zip file that I've got here. So let me just jump to that. So it shows you it's better to sometimes go and prep up front. So let's open this. So yesterday, it was last night, I clicked the Pizza Shack Java button over there, and it gave me this zip file over there. And you will see that this is for people that's familiar with Java, it is all of the source code you need. So whether you are on a Maven build or whether you're on a Gradle build, there is the whole build engine has already been spit out. There's some documentation. So they put the Swagger documentation in here for you as well. They generate for you all of the source code. So let's have a quick look here. I do apologize for people not familiar with Java, but you will get the gist of the story. This is a typical Java thing. So over here will be the files that I need to build the message. So the Pizza Shack application is all about menu items and order items. So let's, I'm going to open this with okay, I can't. So I'll open it with Notepad++, and I'll move this one over to this side. So yeah, my screen management app. So it has generated all of the Java code that this developer needs so that he can gain access to the what was this, the order. So there's a customer name field, and there's a delivered Boolean field, and there's an address field, and a pizza type field, for instance, got generated for him. If I go to so the menu will be the same thing. If I go to the client code, it would have generated for me the various callback methods. There is going to be authorization code. So they give you the source code, how to connect to the server, how to request the token, how to refresh the token. All of that has been done for you. Look, you might want to go and tweak it because the way they code might not conform to your corporate standards, or you might be using Spring Boot as your Java framework, and this is plain Java. So you might want to go and repackage some of these things, but I mean, you get endless amounts of source code, and some of this you can cut and paste because some of this will work just like it is, let's say, for instance, in a Spring Boot environment. You will see that even, I mean, they give you the source code for if you want to zip the requests, it's there. Let's open this client one. This is the one I want to show you quickly. Over here, it's built the authentication in there. It has built the code in there to ask for a token, to set the path of the server. It's quite extensive. And if I would compile this application now in Java, it will immediately work with the API that I've got in place in the API store, customized for my API that I've deployed. I will just need to copy in my client key, client secret, because the code generation doesn't know whether you are in production mode or in staging mode. So there's still a configuration variable or two you must copy over. But in essence, you've got a fully running application, and you will use that then as a starting point to go and develop your own application, whether it's cut and paste the code from there or building your application on top of that. So it's up to you. And it takes a lot of work away where, so just like the tryout screen that I showed you where you can test the APIs, the developer can really get in and go and work with the source code that he is good at. And we support out of the box, how many is it here? 8 different languages, common languages that comes out of the box. And I can even take the Swagger file that is in here, and I can go to another platform and I can generate another about 20 languages. Unfortunately, those are not built into this specific tool, but C#, Java, Android, JavaScript is some of the most popular languages in any way to use. Okay, I think I've done a quick run over everything I wanted to tell you guys. We're sort of an hour and 15 minutes in. I first want to see whether there's more questions, whether it's anybody wanting to speak or anybody wanting to ask a question in the chat window. Quickly see if there's anything coming up. Now, obviously, if you're not going to ask questions, I'm going to bore you with more pre-prepared stuff. Then I'll maybe show you those publisher menus that I didn't do the first run. Steve, are you ready to code yet? Steve is a salesperson. I think he's never seen source code in his life. But Steve, do you understand this?
I followed all that Java perfectly.
Okay, all right. I can
was
make
actually screenshotting it and pasting it directly in to my demo system, and it worked perfectly, even via the screenshot.
I'm so glad, Steve. Even on his Apple Macintosh, I'm obviously running a Windows box over here, but Steve is he's in an absolutely different league. While I wait for questions, I'll maybe just mention to you guys, we've installed this API manager as what we call all-in-one package. So we only started up one server. I think our server, I don't think I want to show you the screen because it will show you all of our other servers. I think there's a 4 CPU server with, I think it's 4 gigs of RAM. Actually, I've got a window open somewhere where I can quickly see that. It's actually this one over here. Let's just do cat proc CPU. I just want to see what server we started up over here. So this is, oh, this is a 2 CPU system. Guys, I can't remember what's the command for the, let's just run top. And if I look over here, 8 gigs, 1, 2, 3, yeah, 8 gigs of RAM, 2 CPUs. That's all you need to run a fully self-sustained API manager. Please keep in mind, for dev or test purposes, you can download it from Docker, and it basically is, let's minimize you, please. Where's my slide deck, please? I want to just show you guys that. It's this sort of setup that you see over here. So we've deployed the gateway nodes, the key manager, the traffic manager, and the publisher all on 2 CPU box with 8 gigs of RAM. It's not a lot. So as I mentioned, when you deploy the gateway, you typically want, I would suggest 4 CPU cores. Sort of, you need to give 1 CPU for the operating system, 1 for the key manager, and 2 for the gateway nodes. So I would say 4 CPU nodes and 4 gigs of RAM. That's all you need. So it can be quite lightweight. Our front end bit, the part that we interacted with, the store and the publisher, I would typically give it a bit more RAM, because if you've got a lot of users, Java's got the tendency to want to cache a lot of things in memory. But it's a very lightweight setup compared to some of the other solutions out there. I get comments that the UI is much better. I can really attest to that. I think WSO2 has put in a lot of effort on this specific version, and it's awesome to see. All right, I first want to go and show you an awesome feature, because I get this question a lot. Christhonie, I've got two APIs in my company, but I want to, I'm going to write an application that is going to use some of my Pizza Shack orders and menu items, but I want a list of countries. But my Pizza Shack application doesn't have countries in there. How can I get my user to use, let's say, that countries that's inside address book and the API calls that's in Pizza Shack? This has been solved in version 3. We go and click on the button API products, and now I can actually stitch together more than 1 APIs. So let's go and use this create button. I'm going to call this my combo app, right? And we're going to put this on pizza, we'll call it super pizza. Right? So new application, we select the unlimited business plan there, and we want, and by the way, you can put a billing engine behind the business plans that people select. So if you want to charge people for which tier they want to subscribe to, and you want to give them a monthly fee. Keep in mind a little bit of work that you will need to do on your side in order to do the billing correctly. But it's easy to then wire this up to a billing application so that you can bill people. And in this case, I'm going to say, listen, I want all of the APIs of the Pizza Shack application. So I can manage orders and I can view the menu, and I want to go to the address book functionality, and I only want to move over the APIs that's got to do with countries. And maybe they're never going to edit any countries. We just want to put the get countries API from the address book application over there. So I want to build a composite application that uses all of the API calls from Pizza Shack and just the one API call and only the get verb from my address book application. And I'm going to press publish, and voila, I have a new application. If I go to my developer portal, I want to show you that I've got my combo app over here, my Super Pizza application. If I click over here, and let's click the try out button, because that's the easiest place to see this type of information. You can see that I now have my country resource and I've got my default order menu resources. Voila, I've never written applications so fast. I think that was 30 seconds in total to build a new composite API application. So web mashup applications, here we come. I think it can't be easier than this. So what is now the benefit of this? The user can have one single endpoint. So you'll see over here, api.docs.co.za/superpizza, because that's what we called it. And in one place, you can pull in one Swagger. You can go and press on the SDK button, and it will get all of the source code to connect to all of those applications. Once he subscribes to that, his token, that one token, will give him access to all of the APIs on that one product without him having to go and know about Pizza Shack application. And his one token, or that token of his, will have access to that one API over there, even though there might be other access tokens necessary for that application. Heinrich, don't you think that is exciting? Because I think, Heinrich, you were one of the people that asked me about that at some point. So, very awesome function. So let's go back to the publisher. So let's show what these other menus were like. So I'm going to just go back to the API we were busy deploying. So I'm going to click this demo API over here. So let's just quickly talk about what was available there. So endpoints, sort of where do I access this API while published? If I don't have a load balancer and I want the API manager to do load balancing for me, I can go and select that I want maybe a failover endpoint. So I might have a failover server deployed, or I've got maybe 2 or 3 servers deployed and I want to be able to give 3 endpoints. You can see I can press this plus button, I don't know, many times. I think I must just type in something. Localhost port 8080. Let's quickly just type that in there. I can have that server, and I can have another server on port 8081, and I can have another server on port 8082, for instance. Now, obviously, these are fictional ports. I've missed something. I can press the button over there. There is a server there, I know that. If I press over here, I know there's no application at that port. But let's say it was there, I can set up multiple endpoints, unlike my previous configuration where I only selected one, and then API Manager will load balance for me between my various applications. I must say, quite rudimentary load balancer. It does what's called round robin algorithm that it uses. So it goes to each of those URLs in turn. It doesn't have a health check feature yet that I know of in this version. But if you are capable of writing some Java code, there's a simple class that you can extend, and you can deploy your own load balancer algorithm, and you can maybe put health checks in there to make sure you don't send data to any of the servers that is not running. If you are in a Kubernetes environment, you can do service discovery as well. sort of outside the scope of this discussion, but it can then detect the various pods that you've got of a certain service, and you can simply give the service name in the API manager, and API manager will figure out where those services are. It will make sure that those endpoints that it discovered are actually up through the health check of that specific component, and it will route traffic there if necessary. All right. We had that. Subscriptions is here where you can specify which business tiers you want. So the ones you see over here is just the ones that come out of the box. Your organization might not want that. Most of the time we only deploy an unlimited business plan, but there might be various reasons why you want to go and play with different levels over here. If you, I'm just going to go back to my API because there was something I wanted to show over here. So when you're on the subscriptions tab, you can also see who is subscribed to your API. So here you can see I'm subscribed through from my Android app and that Postman application I've done a bit earlier on in the demo. It just gives me as the backend developer insight and who has subscribed. Still doesn't tell me if they're actually using it. That is part of the analytics engine. But at least I can see who subscribed, and I have various overriding functions where I can block them from accessing the API. And if I have put in a billing engine over there, I can also click on the invoice button over here to just see how I've billed that user. So based on that business plan that they've selected, I can go and see which invoices have we issued. Again, I just want to remind you, you need to do a little bit of work to tie this thing into your billing engine. There's no billing engine built into the product. You need to do an integration with one. So it can be a WordPress site where you might have a subscription plugin installed, or you might have your existing financial management system. You just need to go and do that work. The Ox is very eager to show you how to do that. We showed you this diagram before, but now I can show you that the published state has been highlighted. And we can see from this point in time, I can now either block people from subscribing to this API, I can demote it, I can deprecate it. So all that deprecate means is the API remains active, but nobody can subscribe to it anymore. So if you have a subscription, you can continue using it. And you typically do this when you go to the next version. So just maybe while we're there, let's do this workflow over there. There's a button right at the top. So let's say you've just deployed a new version of your API. So your backend server has got now new operations. And I'm going to assume that your new version is backwards compatible. You can just press the new version button over here. You can say this is now version 1.1.0.5, for instance. Make this the default version. There's a reason I don't want to do that. And the moment I've done that and I've pressed the publish button, it will immediately have two versions of this API inside the API store. I can now point this version to potentially a different backend server, depending on how I've coded this. I'll just show you guys here. I have switched on this function. So my address book, there's version 1.2 and there's 1.5. And at the moment, nobody is subscribed to that because the developer must, the person that consumes that must come back to the API manager and opt in for this option. There is a way of using the default version, but there's a lot of gotchas to doing that. It might sound like a quick and dirty thing, but I typically don't recommend doing that for various technical reasons. But I like my developers to come in here and proactively select that they want to move their application away from version 1.02 to version 1.05. They can continue using their same API keys. They must just come and press a button. So they don't need to make any changes. So provided that you have a backwards compatible API over here, they can just subscribe to the new one and they can continue using that one. And obviously there will now be new functionality that their application must be redeployed to take, to make use of, but at least they can get to a newer version. Let's say you've got a sunset clause on your version 1.02. you go to your subscription list, you notify all of those people to say version 102 is going to be end of life on 31 of December this year. That would get people to at least upgrade to the latest version, because you might have the need to shut down that server at that stage. So that will show me over here that this version of my APIs, because now we're already on version 1.5, it cloned all of the configuration into the new version, and this one is also published. My other API should still possibly be in the published mode, but maybe this is now the time to deprecate that so that people can't subscribe to this one anymore, because otherwise it's very difficult to get people off your old version. So I don't want to go and press these buttons now, but you sort of get the idea. If you wanted to see the Swagger definition, here it is. If you wanted to see a list of data centers that you've configured, we've seen this diagram before. I don't want to talk about scopes, but here you can type in the business information of the people, that is the business owner or the technical owner of this API, and it assists with that comment section so that the server knows who to email about this one. And properties to difficult, years where you go and publish your documentation. In this case, I've just put out a URL link. So I've just selected this to be a how-to guide. I selected it as option URL, and I've just typed that in there so that the people can see that. And monetization, this is where we're going to set up our billing mechanisms, again, outside the scope of this discussion. So I've gone through sort of all of the new features of API Manager 3.10. I talked about maybe all of the settings that's available on the publisher side. I showed you guys what it looks like when you come to the front end application and how that will work. I showed you how the source code works. I sort of touched on how the tokens work, but that's sort of a technical topic as well. But I think all in all, I think you get a good feeling of what this product can do for you and how you would go about publishing APIs. And just to then close on what I said on Tuesday is, so let's go and reflect on what is now the business value of what we've done and showed you guys today. So number one, our developers are able to do their work much quicker. So you saw me rolling out a new version took a few seconds. Building a composite application was seconds. Publishing an API was, if you're familiar on what to do, it takes you about 2 minutes to go and click and publish your new API. You don't need to make contact with your infrastructure team to open firewall ports, because you would have done that when you installed API Manager. The security tick boxes are ticked. From the perspective of the public or people wanting to use the APIs, they see the screen that we've got here, and they can see immediately which APIs are accessible. They might need to log in to see some of them. Again, that is an option. I've just made everything public for now. Well, actually, I'm logged in, so I think I can see everything. But you guys should be able to do something similar if you log in. I think everything is public, but it shows you we can manage the customer side of the interaction. And then the important bit is we've got the documentation at hand for our APIs, and we can give the developer the source code that he needs for about 8 different languages. Was it 7? 8, I think it was, to immediately get going and start writing code. Whether it was writing that curl command and at least trying it on your command line, or grabbing the bull by the horns and generating a full-fledged application and running it in your IDE. It's a quick way to get going with an API. Steve, I'm going to hand over to you maybe. Yeah, you've got a bit of glare there. Maybe you want to just wrap this up and maybe see if there's any more questions, but I think I'm at the end of my story. I do apologize for me talking that much. If those that know me very well know I talk a lot, so if you let me loose, yeah, it comes at your peril.
So in my introduction on Tuesday, I said, there's not a customer or staff member that works with him who doesn't benefit daily. And I think we expanded the reach of those that benefited from time in your presence. I've seen you speak about API management many times, and it never fails to impress. Thank you, Christhonie. Great job.
Thanks, Steve.
I wish we could have gotten more of our attendees to talk up, but it's a skill I'll still have to work on. So this is kind of like a last call before I close out. But so you're welcome to raise a hand or mention anything on the chat just as I'm closing, so feel free. But if nothing comes up, then what I just want to do is say, you know, this still does remain a series. And the package is 3 weeks, and I keep talking about the 1 week break that we have on 28 July, but it's a 3-part series, and Christhonie has just basically closed out on part 1, which was API management, and it did touch a little bit on integration. I think the other 2 episodes have a tough act to follow, but we always knew that. When we go into the 2nd episode on next week Tuesday, that's when we get into what might be arguably more boring or not quite as sexy. Christhonie, you might want to argue with me here, I don't know, but identity and access management might not have the same sort of sex appeal to it, but you know, as we are increasingly digitizing, and as we are scaling, you know, if we don't have a strong and solid customer identity and access management capabilities built into our environments, a lot of what you've shown us today actually isn't that achievable because we're highly dependent on those services as well. So it pulls together nicely. And then on the 4th of August, the last episode talks about cloud. We had one question today about cloud, and of course, WSO2 gives us the sort of flexibility that you described. I've had the privilege of a preview of Gino's presentation on Time Bank and WSO2 deployed in AWS. And I don't want to oversell it, but I gave him a round of applause on his dry run. So he's got a lot to show us in terms of, to that point of speed and flexibility and scale. There's a lot that cloud services bring to an environment like WSO2, which will be showing us on the 4th of August. Okay, so is anything come up in the meantime? Not?
No, not yet.
Okay. So in that case, we'll wrap it up today. Thanks very much to everybody for attending. Again, to Christhonie, awesome job. Thank you very much. And we'll see everybody at 9 o'clock South African time on Tuesday, the 21st of July.
Steve, I also just want to thank my team for getting me the server up and running. Vernon spent quite some time on getting us this nice demo environment. It's everything here from the Arca side is a team effort. So thanks for you and your contribution as well.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.